I can have your attention, please. We'll ask everyone to please be seated at this time. We're about to begin the services for Mr. Lee R. Snyder. We welcome everyone here at the chapel as well as everyone who's viewing online. And for those of you here in the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please take a moment to place it in this silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. Following this service, the interment will take place at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Skokie. And for those of you that want to join the procession, we'll make sure that we mark your cars with an orange funeral sticker and a magnetic flag for the top of your vehicle as well. And the Shiva will be observed at the Snyder residence in Lake Forest at 25 Honeysuckle Road today, following the interment until 9 p.m., and then Tuesday and Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. All of this information is also listed in your service folder, and for those of you viewing online, that information is on our website. The following friends have been selected to serve as pallbearers this afternoon. At the conclusion of the service, I'll ask the following gentlemen to please step forward. Larry Snyder, Donald Scheck, Steve Robinson, Barry Novak, Gary Kost, Mitchell Miller, Jerry Price, Robert Friedman, and Jeff Sater. Officiating at the services today, Rabbi Yosef Shanowitz.
We have all gathered here to pay tribute and respect to a very special individual, Lee Snyder, whose Hebrew name was and still is Eliezer ben Beryl Halevi Vachana. Lee passed away suddenly and unexpectedly at the age of 68 last Thursday, leaving family and friends, grieving. Before we hear from Lee's brother John, together with his daughter Felicia, and before we hear from Lee's youngest brother Peter, and from a friend, Steve Robinson, we begin by chanting Psalm 23 in the Hebrew, followed by the English. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Rori lo echsar, Binot teshe yarbitzeni, Al mei menuchot yinaleini. Nafshi yeshovev, Yancheni v'maglei tzedek, Leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha heima Yenachamuni taroch lefonai shulchan neged tzoreroi dishanta vashem roshi kosi revaya ach tov vachesed Yirdefuni כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. In the inner flap of the brochure we received, we have Psalm 23 in English. Let us kindly recite it together. Mizmor LeDavid. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone. Can't hear me? Okay. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. I'm Felicia Snyder, Lee's niece and John's daughter, and thank you so much, everyone, for gathering here. My dad wrote something for Lee over the past couple of days, and he didn't think he could get through it, so I'm going to hopefully do him justice. And Uncle Lee, this is for you. This loss is unimaginable. I literally can't imagine a life without Lee, and I never thought I'd have to, because as far back as my memory goes, Lee was there. We were so close in age, we were considered Irish twins. I was the tall, lanky, awkward one. Lee was the short, scrawny, popular one. An unlikely pair, but we were close, a bond that only grew closer as years passed. Lee would call me every day, sometimes at 5 a.m., sometimes 10 times a day. Johnny, what are you doing? Johnny, you got any stock tips? Johnny, buy the pot stocks. Johnny, don't buy the pot stocks. Johnny, what deals do you got cooking? And I'd always answer his questions, and he'd always have an opinion, something to say, even on things that were none of his business. And boy, sometimes he'd wind me up, as brothers do, but I am going to miss those calls. I know there's lots of phones in this room that are going to ring noticeably less now that Lee's gone. What a loss. We grew up in a family of 5 siblings. My sister Susan, may she rest in peace, the eldest. Me, my brother Lee, smack in the middle. My sister Nancy, may she rest in peace. And my brother Peter, the youngest. And like many middle children, Lee seemed to be able to sneak out of the house unnoticed. And such was the case when one day, at our home in Chicago, we got a knock on the door from the police. They were looking for Lee Snyder. Now, this is not a story from his teenage years. No. They were looking for Lee Snyder, who at the time was 4 years old. My father's face, in disbelief, said to the police, "Sure, Lee Snyder lives here. What can we do for you?" The police said that all the neighborhood kids were missing their bicycles and tricycles, and Lee Snyder was the culprit. My father led the police to the garage, and sure enough, there were 30 bicycles and tricycles piled much higher than Lee's height. But that was Lee. He was a wheeler and a dealer from day one, and a smart one. At 4, he remembered who each bicycle belonged to, and with his tail between his legs, returned them each to their rightful owner. And he did it with that unmistakable, soft smile on his face. A little mischievous, but man, was it likable. And that was Lee. He was likable, he was funny, traits that served him well as he made a name for himself in the steel industry. Lee was trustworthy, and he was loyal. When he fell in love with Amber, he said that she was the one love of his life, and he meant it. After she passed, he told me, "Johnny, she really was the one love of my life." And he stayed true to that to the very end. May they now rest in peace, reunited. And Lee loved Gabi. He wanted to make sure, in his mother's absence, that Gabi was always taken care of, and he did. He had a ton of friends, including all of you here today, and neighbors in his building where he so proudly lived. He had recently gotten his loft painted, new furniture, new kitchen, and he was so proud of the new pergola he built on his deck. This was all in the last year or so that he did these renovations. Lee was creating a space he was meant to enjoy getting old in. To listen to that record collection that he loved, some classic rock, some blues. Maybe Lee would even dust off his drum set. He was taken too soon. There was meant to be more trips with me to Chinatown for Egg Foo Young. There were supposed to be more meals at Manny's. So Lee, you may have been stubborn as an ox, but you were loyal to the end. If you can hear me, Lee, give me a call. Heck, give me 10 a day. I miss you, brother.
And the Lamb lies down on Broadway. Early morning Manhattan, ocean's winds blow on the land. Movie Palace now is undone. The all-night watchmen have had their fun. Sleeping cheaply on the midnight show, it's the same old ending, time to go. 1974, The Lamb lies down on Broadway. Genesis. Lee's favorite song, his favorite album. A double album, in fact. Back when that was a thing and music was music. When you had something to hold, when you could touch it and you could feel it. The same way Lee held his friends and his families close. Last week, I not only lost my brother, but I lost a friend. According to my parents, the first two words out of my mouth were E, not mommy, not daddy, not Susan, Nancy, or Johnny, but E. The family story also goes in the mornings when I would often climb out of my crib, and when my parents heard the inevitable thump, they would come looking for me, and they knew exactly where to find me, in bed, curled up next to Lee. This is how my deep love for Lee began. To this day, I have memories of Lee bringing me balloons as a little boy. And it was Lee who called John, me, and himself the Brothers of America Club. Lee had a way about him. No one could say no to Lee. Certainly not our mother, Helen. He had a knack of always getting what he wanted. In the summer of 1972, our father, Bert, brought Helen home a brand new Delta 88 red convertible. Somehow, he convinced our mom, just 3 days later, to give him the keys to the car by telling her that he would just take it around for a spin. around the block. So on a warm Saturday morning, with John in the front passenger seat and Nancy and me in the back seat with the top down, Lee behind the wheel, and we're off. Only we weren't going around the block. Lee had other ideas and the love for stereo equipment. With Johnny screaming at Lee to watch out for every car passed, Lee navigated us to Golf Mill so Lee could check out a hi-fi system he had his eye on. On the way home, with Johnny still screaming at Lee, "Watch out!" Lee driving the brand new red convertible our dad has just bought our mom, and the top down, rear-ended the car in front of us. Of course, when we got home, Lee blamed Johnny. A couple of years later, our folks decided it was time for Lee to have his own car. They had gotten tired of the burn holes in their seats of their car. So they bought Lee a 1974 brown BMW, a 2002 series. I don't know if you remember. Eventually, after sharing a bedroom with John for 18 years, it was time for Lee to get his own room. And so he moved into the basement. And he totally tricked it out with a waterbed, stereo, pool table, and couches. This was the essence of Lee's lifestyle. He loved music, always upgrading his stereo equipment with separate components. He had the Macintosh receiver and amped. He loved the girls and his friends. When I asked my mom, "What's the smell coming from the basement?" Helen would say, "Oh, that's just Lee's incense." Lee was a huge White Sox fan. Always seemed to have a line ball game going in the street on Enfield with his friends in bare feet or in desert boots. Lee joined the family scrap metal business and went on to work in the steel industry, and eventually met and married Amber, who was the love of his life. And formed a tight bond with Amber's son, Gabi, who he cared for so deeply. Lee was outgoing, sensitive, sweet, caring, smart, thoughtful. He was a great listener, and not just for his friends, but his friends' spouses and children. And I guess that was his knack, why no one wanted to say no to him, because he loved his friends and they loved him. Whenever I ran into somebody he knew, they would invariably ask, "How's your brother Lee doing?" Something inside me has just begun. Lord knows what I have done, and the lamb lies down on Broadway. On Broadway. They say the lights are always bright on Broadway. They say there's always magic in the air. I love and miss you, your brother.
I cannot believe I'm doing this, and I don't think I have a unique thing to say. It was all said already. But I've been processing the unexpected and unnecessary loss of Lee over the last few days. When I found out I was speaking today, I began gathering my personal thoughts. I'm hoping you'll be able to relate in a similar way. I remember meeting Lee as an acquaintance in 1968. We were not immediate friends, but over the course of a year or so, our paths began to cross more frequently, and we found we had common interests. For example, we enjoyed playing Pimp Gut on Friday evenings at Barry Novak's kitchen table and yelling "Buck around the table" at Barry Cohn. Freshman year at Niles North, Lee and I both joined the wrestling team. Lee was the only person in the entire school who could qualify for the 95-pound weight class. and was immediately elevated to the varsity level. Lee was also an aspiring drummer. He had a drum kit in his basement man cave in the house on Kildare. We realized we both love rock and jazz and blues music. We attended numerous concerts of all the big names of the time: Zeppelin, Tull, The Who, Emerson, and of course Genesis. The list goes on and on. Additionally, we bought all the latest album releases, and we listened together on our stereos along with Jerry Price. The three of us spent a lot of time and money continuously upgrading our speakers and our amplifiers to achieve the highest fidelity listening experience. Lee eventually reached his ultimate satisfaction when he purchased his coveted Macintosh preamp and phase linear power amp. After high school, Lee worked in the family scrapyard at Snyder Iron. We attended numerous Bulls and Sox games together. He was the first to introduce me to the ultimate driving machine, his new sporty BMW. We also traveled together, getting away from Chicago winters to various locations. Florida and Jamaica come to mind. As time passed, Lee married Amber and helped her raise Gabi. After Amber unexpectedly passed away, Lee lost a part of his soul that he was never really able to recapture. However, he continued to raise Gabi as if he was his own son, and they lived together for several years in the condo on South Michigan Avenue. In more recent times, Lee started his own steel business and continued to leverage his deeply cultivated clients and knowledge of the business. Working from home, Lee found time to keep in touch with everyone. He knew the routines of all his close friends, when they got up and when they went to work. He knew he could call me between 7:30 and 8 in the morning and catch up on all that had happened since we last spoke just the previous afternoon. And by the time he called me, he had already completed at least 2 or 3 other calls before then. I thought of Lee as the town crier. If you had information you wanted to get out, Lee was your man. On the contrary, if you had details you wanted to hold close, you didn't tell Lee. How many times did he say, "It's just between us"? Or if you repeat this to anybody, just don't say you heard it from me. Before COVID hit, Lee attended most of our friends' regular birthday celebration dinners. Most notable, the year we all turned 60, Lee joined in our trip to Utah, including Donald Scheck, Gary Cost Pickles, Randy Weber, and Danny Lazarus. We had a great time hiking, ATV riding, and just hanging out and relaxing together. In the end, over 50 years, it's hard to believe. I know so many other people here have known Lee for even longer. Lee was a character, to say the least. Some might say he was a bit of an instigator, although if you confronted him about it, he would always deny it. But the fact that we're all here reflects the mutual respect and loyalty Lee had for his friends. If Lee needed anything I could do for him, he could count on me. And if I needed anything from him, I always knew he'd be there for me. Lee was like all of us, working hard to make a better life for himself and wanting to leave the world a better place, just not so soon. For that, I'll always love you, little buddy, and miss you dearly. Thank you.
I had a sense the speakers before me would touch upon Lee's life and character, which they so wonderfully did. I thought I would just add a little bit and touch upon some aspects of Lee's spiritual life, which some here may not know. Lee was a person who did not hide or deny his faith. As a matter of fact, he considered himself a proud Jew. He attended Hebrew school and was bar mitzvahed at Congregation B'nai Amunah, where he prayed and laid tefillin here in Skokie. He completed the Hebrew high school program on the Jewish high holidays. He would take off from work. He lit Hanukkah candles. This past Hanukkah, he used his mom's Hanukkah candelabra and made sure Peter had his candles too. He lit candles to commemorate the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of his parents, and unfortunately his sisters as well, and made sure his brothers did the same. He visited the graves of his loved ones often, and last, just about 2 weeks ago, Lee attended family seders on Passover and tried his best to follow the tradition of his forebears. He had a mezuzah, he gave tzedakah, charity, he loved his mom's Jewish cooking, and some here may know, and he told this to me personally, that he and a group of friends regularly studied with a rabbi, again here in Skokie, until recently. The rabbi unfortunately passed away this past summer. He and Lee are now both in heaven in the same place. And as we heard, Lee never recovered from Amber's passing and always tried to be there for his stepson, Gabe. A tahara, spiritual cleansing, using like mikveh waters, was done on Lee's body after his passing, along with the prayers recited to pray, beg, and make sure that Lee rests in heaven together with his loved ones. But above all else, as we heard earlier, Lee was a compassionate person. He was present in every conversation. He connected with people and was a phenomenal listener. He was well liked in his industry and elsewhere and everywhere. After the tragedy of the Twin Towers, the president at the time said, quote, "Terrorists' attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest and tallest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundations of our country, the United States of America. These terrorist acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of America's resolve. In a similar way, the angel of death, so to say, tried to shatter us with Lee's untimely, sudden passing. But our resolve, our steel resolve, to continue Lee's legacy of good deeds is stronger even than that of the angel of death. Like a stone thrown into a pond, a good deed can create ripples that extend far beyond the initial splash. Or as another saying goes, used to go, noble deeds and hot baths are the best cures for depression and anxiety. Tehei nishmato tzrura b'tzor hachayim. May his soul be bound in the bond of eternal life. Began Eden tehei menuchato. May he rest in peace in the Garden of Eden, in paradise. Zichrono livracha. May his memory be a blessing. May I ask you all to kindly rise. And again, in the inner flap of our brochure, at the bottom, let us kindly recite this together. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Lee R. Snyder, who has gone on to eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be God's possession, may his repose be peace, and let us say, Amen. Kindly be seated.